lecture is on the New Deal, basically women involved with the New Deal or how women are involved in the New Deal. Now, the New Deal is basically a stimulus, an economic stimulus program. It was a way to stimulate the economy and basically get the economy back going. It's trying to break that cycle, that in a sense, that poverty cycle. And one of the ways, there's a lot of things that they're going to do, but one of the ways is basically to use deficit spending and put money into the economy by basically creating work project programs and then paying people to be in those programs to work. And it's trying to get money out and into the economy to basically break that cycle so people have money so they will go spend it and basically start and basically kind of get the economy going. There will also be programs dealing with banks. That's where you're going to get FDIC, where your money is insured. It will deal with the farming community, trying to raise the prices. It will deal with labor. So it will deal with a lot of different issues. Okay, so there are definitely no specific New Deal programs aimed at women. Women will definitely be a part of the New Deal in a sense as just as a society, if you will. So there's no programs that are directed especially at women, although some women are going to get jobs through the various work project programs. The CWA, which is the Civil Works Administration, is going to hire approximately 300,000 women. And in this program, they're basically doing clerical work. Okay, the Civil Works Administration is going to do a lot of building projects. So you don't see women building things, but you see them in the offices. Okay, another one, the WPA, the Works Project Administration, will have approximately 400,000 women that will work with that program or work in that program. They will do clerical. They'll also do research, health and nutrition positions, clerical library positions. And then so all these people, men and women, whoever gets a job with the government, with the CWA, with the WPA, is that you're getting a paycheck at the end of the week. And the idea is that if you get a paycheck in the end of the week, then you're going to go spend that money. And yes, in the beginning, you're going to spend it on basic necessity items, and maybe you'll try and save a little bit. But as the years go by, as a few years go by, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable to buy, you know, a little bit more of a convenience item. And that's exactly what they want to happen to start to stimulate the economy. Okay, now, oh, I'm sorry, I got talking about that. Also with the WPA will also hire artists to paint, to sing, to act. So you'll have the men that will build a library or a public building, such as a library, and then they'll bring in artists to basically put a mural, some type of art thing on the wall, and artists will get paid. They will pay artists, as in like actors and singers, to put on concerts and plays in like parks, and they're getting paid by the federal government. So it's trying to get a lot of very different people jobs, and so women will definitely get jobs as like artists also. Okay, another program, the Farm Security Administration, is going to hire photographers. Well, one of the things they'll do is hire photographers to document the poverty of the farmers. And this is where a woman by the name of Dorothea Lange will come in. Dorothea Lange she was actually a pretty well-known photographer. She shot in black and white. At this point in time, she lived in California. She lived in like Central California. And so she will get hired by Farm Securities Administration, and she is there to document the migrant worker in California. And I have pictures. I have pictures of Dorothea Lange and her work. One of them is the classic migrant mother. She's kind of I don't know. She's not contemplating life, but she has children around her, and it shows the absolute poverty. This is the thing about Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was a good photographer to begin with, but the work that she does during the Depression years really puts Dorothea Lange on the map as a photographer and really as a famous photographer. She, as I said, she shoots in black and white, and she somehow is able to capture humanity. She captures like raw humanity. and her pictures are not posed. She doesn't have people pose for her pictures, but she somehow is always like walking around and trying to get that perfect spot, and she probably takes many, many pictures, but she somehow captures this raw humanity of people. And it really is a good documentation of the life of a migrant worker in California. And it shows the absolute destitute poverty there it is. And also it puts Dorothea Lange on the map as a photographer. And what is very ironic, okay, now she gets paid by the federal government. She gets paid on a weekly basis. And they give her rolls of film, and she gets the rolls of film, she takes her pictures, she brings back the used rolls of film, and she exchanges them for a new batch. So she does not have any control over those pictures. And so she's not making money off of those pictures, and that's what artists do. They take pictures and then they have exhibits and they create books and they make money off of their work. She's making money because the federal government is paying her, but she's not making money in a sense off the pictures. And ironically, it's those pictures that actually put her on the map as a photographer. Okay, another one is Social Security Act. Social Security Act is basically aid to basically poor people and people with disabilities, and then also aid to dependents and children. And so women might be a part of like a disability, that type of thing. But a lot of times women will get Social Security because of the dependency. They're a dependent of somebody who's getting Social Security. Social Security Act, we still have it with us today. At the time period, it was basically created as a safety net because those that are that have a disability or like are unemployed, they're going to be the ones to hit the ground first if we were to ever have a major economic problem again. And so this was a way to create a safety net so they wouldn't hit the ground. It wasn't necessarily meant to be what many people refer to today as a welfare program, but it has changed dramatically over the years. Okay, now moving on. Still talking about the New Deal, but African Americans definitely do not fare well under the New Deal, meaning that there are no New Deal programs basically aimed towards the African American community. And also, that community are not getting jobs through the federal government. They're not looking really to hire African Americans. Every once in a while, you might see African Americans get a job here and there, but there's nothing really aimed at them. So Roosevelt will definitely be criticized because of this, because he's really not doing anything to help that community, and they have an extremely high unemployment rate. Okay, now, I said there were a few exceptions, okay? You have the WPA that will hire artists. You also have the Federal Theater and Art Projects. They will basically hire artists, okay, as I mentioned before. And sometimes African Americans can get jobs through the WPA and the Federal Theater and Art Project because they're artists. And so you might see some African Americans getting jobs that way, but it's still hit and miss. Okay. Now, somebody that we definitely have to talk about is a woman. Well, no, let me back up. Eleanor Roosevelt, which is the wife of Franklin Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt has always been a huge friend and supporter to the African American community. She was a part of the settlement houses when she was younger, and she knows the poverty that African Americans can live in. And so she's always been a huge supporter of them. And so she's trying to get support and help through the administration for that community. Now, she's not going to be able to create any programs. He's not going to create any programs directed at them, okay? But she's really going to kind of put on pressure, if you will, to her husband to do something about the African American community. And what will be created is you'll have 45 African Americans that will be hired in the Roosevelt administration during this period of time. And this is actually huge because this is the first time African Americans have ever been hired into into the federal government. Well, not federal government, but into like a presidential administration. So they're not doing high-level jobs. I would say they're doing kind of low-level jobs, or kind of like the assistant to the assistant on something. But the fact is that this is really the first time that they're basically working within a presidential administration. Now, there are 44 males and 1 woman. That woman is Mary Bethune. Mary Bethune is an educator. She has been an educator all her life. She's been educating African Americans. She was mainly in the Florida region. She had created some schools. She was a teacher herself. She will create some schools for African American children. And she was a huge supporter of the Roosevelts, basically as he's campaigning. But Mary Bethune is also a friend of Eleanor's. And so this is definitely the connection. And if you look at it from that point of view, you're not surprised that Mary Bethune is going to get a position within the Roosevelt administration. But having said that, she's highly qualified because she's been doing education all her life. So Mary Bethune is going to be a part of the Black Cabinet, which is the 45 African Americans that will get jobs in the Roosevelt administration. And one of the things that she is involved in is the National Youth Administration. And that's aimed, obviously, at dealing with the youth, but her focus is trying to help African American youth. And the National Youth Administration tries to set up some programs for kids, for the youth, so they can get into programs like after school, and kind of have a place for them to go. And she's focusing on the African American children. And so she definitely is very well suited for the position, and definitely a major position for the African Americans and Mary Bethune herself. Okay, now moving away from the African American community and just talking about women in general. The Roosevelt administration is actually going to appoint women to high-level positions within his administration. So in that sense, women actually fare very well during the Roosevelt administration, because he will actually have a huge amount of appointments for women within the administration. I'm going to give you examples of, okay? You're going to have women appointed to these positions: the Civil Service Commission, Director of the Mint, that's who coins the money, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, the Women's Professional Projects, or it's called Head of the Women's Professional Projects for the WPA. That'll also be a woman. Also the Minister to Denmark, U.S. Minister to Denmark, and also Ambassador to Norway. These will all be positions held by women. Another one that will be held by women, or a woman, is going to be Secretary of the Labor. Secretary of Labor is a cabinet position, and this is going to be held by Frances Perkins. This is the first time that a woman has ever been appointed to a cabinet member position. And so this is actually a big deal for women. And Frances Perkins is definitely going to really pull her weight and actually do very well as Secretary of Labor. Another thing, just kind of moving into modern times, if you were to ever go into Washington, D.C., they have this huge labor building, and it's actually known as the Frances Perkins Labor Building. So she's definitely made her legacy that way, but she definitely made her legacy through legislation. Frances Perkins did a lot of work, research, and did a lot of writing on the Social Security program. So she definitely played a very integral role into the Roosevelt administration. Okay, another aspect we definitely have to talk about. I normally actually don't talk a huge amount about wives, but Eleanor Roosevelt's kind of unique in the sense that she's actually going to do a lot during the administration. She will definitely do a lot of speaking. She'll do a lot of speaking engagements. She'll speak to the poor, African Americans. She'll speak about providing access for women, and definitely be kind of that contact person. Now, there's there's definitely, in a sense, there's like a reason why there's a lot more going on. Franklin Roosevelt, okay, so let me start back. Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, I believe, are fourth cousins, okay? And so Eleanor Roosevelt is actually a relative of Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt is basically the same family tree that kind of goes into different branches, okay? And they're like fourth cousins, okay? But they marry, because it's legal to marry. And Eleanor Roosevelt never had to change her last name because she was always a Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt was educated. She's from the Roosevelt family, which is very wealthy. She was educated, and she got into the progressive movement. She got into settlement houses, and she was always basically working for the poor and the underprivileged. And then she got into working with the African Americans and really tried to support them as much as she could. She's very much of her own woman. She was very good at giving speeches. She was very good at, in a sense, organizing things, running things on her own. Another thing is that after Eleanor and Franklin will marry, and so Franklin will be in, I believe it's his early 30s, Franklin will contract polio. And polio is a disease at that point in time, in the 40s, there's no cure. We have a cure for it now. Polio affects the muscles, and what it does is it weakens the muscles. And so you can have polio, and you can have a very strong case of polio and actually be paralyzed. And actually people will be paralyzed to the point that they will actually die because they can't breathe, their lung muscles don't work. Or you could have a very mild case of polio where you can actually function and you can move around, but you have weakness. Franklin's polio was a very mild case of polio, and he did a lot of exercises and kind of PT, and he was able to really get back out there, obviously, because he's a politician and has had a career his whole life. But he wears braces. He'll wear leg braces. He will walk. He'll have a cane. People really didn't know that at that time. The media never showed pictures of that. But whenever he's out and about, he usually has people around him, which isn't odd for a president. But you'll have people that will be very close to him, and they're honestly having their hands on his back to basically steady him when he's like out in public and standing out in public. When he gives speeches, he will hold on to the lectern, which once again, a lot of speakers do that. He's actually holding on to support himself. And so there was tricks and techniques, and the press knew about it, but the press never showed it, okay? So very few people actually knew that Roosevelt had polio. But this is where Eleanor comes in, is that Roosevelt, he's truly busy dealing with the Depression, but he couldn't travel and do the speeches and get out and do the speeches as much as another person could. And so he would always send Eleanor to go do that because, she could easily get out and move around the country and give speeches. So she's definitely going to be a major aspect, major asset to his administration. And what she would do is she would travel around the country, and then she would kind of report back to him and tell him how the New Deal was working and the people that she talked to. Okay, 1902 to 1905, she was involved in the National Consumers League, the Junior League, becoming involved in settlement houses. I mentioned that. I talked about that. While in the White House, she'll be a strong supporter of women's organizations. She was constantly giving speeches, always out and about. She spoke on the behalf of the condition of workers, on the behalf of relief agencies and human rights issues, or human rights issues when you talk about the poverty going on during the Depression. And as I said, she supported and might have encouraged Roosevelt with appointments. We definitely know that the Black Cabinet comes from Eleanor Roosevelt. We know that that is definitely, I don't know if you want to call it pressure or influence, definitely is coming from Roosevelt. She advocated greatly for the African Americans. She lobbied for the NAACP. She fought for African Americans getting jobs within the WPA, meaning like the artists, right, and tried to get them hired, right? And then she will also have a friend, and her name is Marian Anderson. Marian Anderson, African American, was an opera singer at the time period, and Marian Anderson was popular, okay? And I would say she was more popular in Europe than in the United States, but she was definitely popular. Part of that has to do because she was African American. Okay, but Marian Anderson and Eleanor Roosevelt have basically struck up a friendship, and so Eleanor is always supporting her and supporting her good friend. So Marian Anderson was supposed to perform at the Constitutional Hall in Washington, D.C., and this was all arranged. Basically, everything was set to go. And then you have a group, it's called the Daughters of the Revolution. It's called DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, which Eleanor Roosevelt is actually a member of Daughters of the American Revolution. And at the last minute, because Anderson was Black, they will basically cancel the show. And Eleanor is like absolutely furious. I mean, she kind of lost it on this one. And she will actually give up her membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution. And then she went on and she arranged an outdoor concert in front of the Lincoln Memorial. This concert for Anderson. And this concert at the Lincoln Memorial, actually, because it was outdoors, would actually hold more people. And you have over 75,000 attendees. And so it was kind of like Eleanor just kind of showing it to him, right? Also, when Eleanor basically was escorted to her seat, she kind of made a big deal about it. She was kind of one of the last people to be escorted to her seat by an African-American gentleman. And once again, it was just a way for her to shove it in the ladies' faces. So once again, I think it just kind of shows her loyalty and her support of the African American community. Talked about that. Okay. Also, New Deal and women in other things, or what women, or I guess I should say what women are doing in the New Deal. I had mentioned to you Frances Perkins. She's Secretary of Labor. She will draft the Social Security Act, the Federal Emergency Relief Act, and she'll also draft the National Labor Relations Act. So she's actually writing like major pieces of legislation, which will become legislation. Molly Dewson, D-E-W-S-O-N. Molly Dewson was a social worker, and she's working under, well, basically under the umbrella of the New Deal. She was hired within the New Deal program. She, as a social worker, helped secure Unemployment Insurance Act, or she helped secure Unemployment Insurance Act in New York, minimum wage laws in Illinois and Ohio, and she also helped with creating the Social Security Act, meaning like she kind of gave her input and kind of gave kind of research and input into what will become the Social Security Act. Ellen Woodward worked for the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the CWA, and the WPA. She emphasized reaching out to African American women, trying to get them access into jobs. That did not always translate to like major change, but she definitely advocated for it, and she probably got a few jobs here and there. Okay, kind of moving away from that, but still talking about the New Deal. Unionization, or the life under the New Deal. Unionization, many people look to unions to help them through tough times. Whenever you have tough times, you tend to see union membership go up. When you have not tough times economically, union memberships actually decrease a little bit. And so you actually will see union membership actually go up during this time period. Roosevelt is going to put forth what's known as the National Industrial Recovery Act. It's NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, that guaranteed workers the right to organize and bargain collectively through their representatives of their own choosing. And this was one thing that labor really wanted and made labor happy. Roosevelt was a little bit leery about it because he thought that it might end up translating into strikes. There will be a few strikes during the Depression years, but not like a huge amount of strikes during the Depression years. And in a sense, it's just an overall kind of statement. Women are definitely going to be joining unions. And that's really why I bring it up. Women are definitely major participants in unions. You will see unions launch membership drives. You'll have the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. Memberships will increase 200,000 in 1934 to over 800,000 by 1940. So whenever there's tough times, you have union membership go up. You'll also see Hispanic women join unions and be involved in a few protests. You'll also see some union protests like within the agricultural working fields. They don't really do a whole lot, and they're not major protests. AFL, American Federation of Labor, Luisa Moreno will become very involved. She'll try to unify the Puerto Rican women in the garment industries. So she's trying to really create this base for the Hispanic women working within the garment union or the garment district. Women will be involved in some major labor demonstrations. They'll provide food, supplies. Sometimes they will be picketers. Now, I want to set it up because there's going to be one major strike during the 1930s, and this is 1937, and I actually have a slide on it. I have a picture on it. And in 1937, this is a General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan, and it's going to be what's known as a sit-down strike. The sit-down strike is going to be the first time that they will actually have a sit-down strike. A sit-down strike is workers of the GM plant. They basically want GM to recognize the union. They don't have a union. They want to be recognized as a union. And what workers have been doing is that they've been stashing food and blankets for a period of time. Then at a designated time, they all sit down. And so they are striking within the building, and they have a sit-down strike. So the idea is, A, they're not going to shoot up their own building, and they can't bring people in to work the plant because the workers are inside the plant. And so really, in a sense, they're holding the GM plant hostage. But they're also going to have picketers, okay? And that's where the women come in. Relatives of the men, whether it's daughters, mothers, sisters, whatever, the women are actually going to be the picketers. And every once in a while, they're going to try and sneak some food in. But you'll see the women actually picketing the GM plant. And another idea with that is that they also believe that the plant will not use violence against the women picketers. I will say that the strike was successful, and GM relented and basically created or allowed a union to be created by the workers. And so this is kind of a really good example. I would say this is the major strike during the 1930s. They will have a few other ones, but this is kind of your kind of big one. And women definitely played a big part in it. Okay, moving on from that and just talking about life in the 1930s. This is already starting to change, and you still see it in the 1930s. Dating kind of changed. Men usually called on women in the houses to pick them up for a date. You definitely don't always see that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you see more women like meeting a man for lunch or for coffee. Okay, and so once again, that's something that started in the 20s and will continue to do so in the 30s. We still got that going on. And I think that is going to wrap up the lecture on the New Deal. There's definitely more lectures to come.